This is Nick with logosbynick.com, and in today's tutorial I'll be demonstrating how you can create this vintage style text poster using Inkscape. And if you'd like to learn more about how Inkscape works, be sure to check out the Inkscape Masterclass, which is a collection of over 50 videos where I go over all of the major tools and features in Inkscape and I explain what they are and demonstrate how they work. I'll put a link in the description of the video if you want to check that out. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here in Inkscape. I'm going to open up a blank canvas, as you can see here, and I just want to make sure that we're all working with a similar view before we get started. So I'm just going to come up here to where it says View, make sure you have Custom selected, and then we'll go to Zoom. We're going to zoom in at 1:1, and then I'll open up the Align and Distribute menu with this button over here, and then I will open up the Edit Objects, Colors, Gradients, and Stroke menu with this button right here. And where it says Align and Distribute, you're going to want to make sure you have Last Selected chosen where it says Relative To. And once we've done that, we're good to get started. So the first thing we're going to create is the actual text. So I'm going to grab the text tool over here, and I'm going to click on the canvas. I'm going to use all caps for what I'm going to write now. I'm going to create each text item on its own line. So I'm going to write how for the first line, second line, to create, and for this third line, vintage, just like I had in the thumbnail of the video, how to create vintage text and posters, each on its own line. And what I'll do now is let me grab the select tool. I want to take this text right here, this middle word vintage. If you saw in the thumbnail of the design, I had that word over, I had it placed on top of like a banner. So I want to make sure I use a different font for this word right here. I'm going to open up the text editor. I'm going to click on that text and hold Control-Shift-T to open up the text editor, or you can just click on this T icon up here. I like to use Control-Shift-T because it's easier. And the font I'm going to use is called Zabatana Poster. I'm going to go with that. I'll have a link in the description to a post where I have all of the fonts and textures that I'm going to be using in this tutorial. You don't necessarily have to use these fonts that I'm using. You can use whatever font you'd like, but if you really want to get that vintage look that I have in the thumbnail of the video, I'd recommend downloading and installing these fonts. So I'm going to apply that. I want to make that a little bigger by holding Control and Shift and clicking and dragging to scale that up. And for these text items over here, the font I'm going to use for that is Control-Shift-T. I'm going to use League Gothic. There we go. I'm going to use the normal regular size, apply that. Let me make that a little bigger. Control-Shift and scale that up. And then I just want to put everything near each other over here. Let me click and drag over all of these. And in the Align and Distribute menu, I'm going to center them on the vertical axis. And then I'll come down here to Distribute, and I'm going to click on Make Vertical Gaps Between Objects Equal. So let me click off of that to deselect everything. What I want to do now is make each of these objects the same width, except for this middle text right here. So let me click on this word right here. I'm going to turn on this lock icon where it says when locked, change both the width and the height by the same proportion. Turn that on. I'm going to right click that and go to Copy. And then I'm going to click on this top word up here and go to Edit, Paste Size, Paste Width. And it's going to make it the same width as the next item. I'll come down here and do the same thing. Edit, Paste Size, Paste Width. We're not going to do this with this middle word here because this word needs to be a little bigger than the others because this is going to go on a banner. And I'll do the same thing down here. Edit, Paste Size, Paste Width. And what I will do now is I want to put little lines between these two text items right here. So I'm going to grab the Squares and Rectangles tool, and I'll just click and drag to create a little rectangle in there. Let me get rid of that stroke by holding Shift and clicking the X. I want to make that black. Let me grab the Select tool, bring that down a little bit. These are just meant to be little accent pieces. They don't have to. You don't have to necessarily use these, but I think they make the design just come together a little more. And again, I want to make these the same width. So I'll go to Edit, Paste Size, Paste Width. There we go. Now let me right click that and go to Duplicate, bring this one down here. There we go. Let me bring these all a little closer now. In fact, I want to take this middle text right here and make that even bigger. Right about there. Let me bring these a little closer. Now I'm going to click and drag over all of these. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to center them on the vertical axis and then distribute, make vertical gaps between objects equal like that. Okay, now I'm going to click off of that to deselect everything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on creating a banner for this word vintage right here. So let me take these objects right here and just hold Control and just move them out of the way a little bit. And I'll take these objects and do the same thing. Hold Control, move it up out of the way. And now I'm going to grab the Squares and Rectangles tool. Well, you know what? First, what I want to do is let me go back to the Select tool. Let me click on this text right here and make this white. Then I'll grab the Squares and Rectangles tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle going over the text right there. I'm going to make that black. Grab the Select tool. I'm going to send that to the bottom by clicking the button that says Lower Selection to the bottom. Or what I like to do is just press End on the keyboard, the End key, and it sends it to the bottom. That's good. Let me just size that up a little better. We want a little bit of padding around the edges, not too much though. And then I'll hold Shift and click on the word and just make sure I have it centered up on the vertical and horizontal axis. Let me click on that, click off of it to deselect everything. Now I'll take just this object right here, just this rectangle. I'll go to Path, Object to Path, and then I'm going to right click it and go to Duplicate. And I'm going to make this red, and I'm going to give this a red stroke by holding Shift and clicking on the color red. And then I want to send that to the bottom by pressing End on the keyboard. And the red stroke, I want to make that a little thicker. I'm going to come up here to the Stroke Style tab, and I'm just going to increase the size of that a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. That's a good thickness right there. And now what I want to do is convert this to a path. So I'll go to Path, Stroke to Path, and then Path, Break Apart, and then Path, Union. And the whole point of that was to end up with the rectangle just like this black one here, only slightly thicker on both dimensions right there. Now what I want to do is take this black rectangle and duplicate that. I'm going to click on it, then press Control D on the keyboard. And I'm just going to take this and move this down to the left over here like that. And I'm going to send that to the bottom by pressing End on the keyboard. Let me move this down here like this. I'm going to grab the Nodes tool, click and drag over these two nodes to the right here. Hold Control and just click and drag these over to the left like that. This is going to be like the tail, kind of like the tail of the ribbon. Right about there is good. Now I'm going to click and drag over those nodes right there, and I want to insert a new node in the middle. So we'll come up here to the very top left where it says Insert New Nodes into Selected Segments. Click on that. And then I want to click on just that new node right there and hold Control and just move this over to the right to give it kind of like a little bit of a fishtail for the end there. Maybe a little less. That's good right there. Now let me grab the Select tool again. Let me duplicate that by hitting Control D on the keyboard, and I will flip that horizontally and bring this over here to the top right. And I want to send this to the bottom as well. I'm going to press End on the keyboard. I want to bring this right about here. And then I'll hold Shift and click on the other one so we have both of these little ribbon tails selected. And I'll go to Path, Union, and then I'll hold Shift and click on this red rectangle right here and center it up on the vertical and horizontal axis like that. And then I'll go to Path, Difference. And there you have our ribbon. So let me take these text objects right here and just hold Control and move them up a little bit. And I'll do the same thing with these. I'll click and drag over those, hold Control, move these down a little bit like that. And that's what I'm looking for right there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag over everything. I'm going to group them together by clicking the button up here that says Group Selected Objects, or you could just press Control G. This is what I like to do. And I'm going to shear it a little bit. So I'm going to click on this object again. If you notice here when you have it selected, you have these arrows right here. These are the scaling handles. They allow you to scale an object. If I click on the object, it's going to give us the rotation and the shearing handles, which will allow us to either rotate or shear the object. I want this shearing handle over here to the right. I'm just going to click and drag that up a little bit. Maybe about that much right there. That's pretty good. And now it's time to create kind of like a frame or a border going around the words here. So let me grab the Squares and Rectangles tool again. I'm going to click and drag to create a rectangle going over all of those words. I want to give this a black outline, so I'm going to hold Shift and click on the color black. And I want it to have no fill, so I'm going to click on this red X to get rid of the fill color. And I want to make that border a little thinner. I don't want it to be that thick. I'm going to try maybe 8 pixels. That looks pretty good. Okay, so let me go back to the Select tool. Let me convert that to a path by going to Path, Object to Path. And then I want to hold Shift and click on the text objects just to make sure we have it centered up on this horizontal and vertical axis like that. Now let me click off of that to deselect everything and click on just this rectangle right here. I'm going to go back to the Nodes tool, the Edit Paths by Nodes. Click and drag over these top two nodes. Insert a new node in there. And do the same thing down here. Take those two nodes and put a new one in there. Now what I want to do is grab just those two nodes right there. Click and drag over both of those. And up here in the tool settings, you're going to see Show Transformation Handles for selected nodes. If I turn that on, it's going to give us scaling handles for the nodes that we have selected, which is going to be useful here, which is what I want. I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to grab the scaling handle up here and just pull this out a little bit. If you notice here, we're giving the top and the bottom a little bit of a tip like that. Now I'm going to turn off the scaling handles, show transformation handles for selected nodes. Turn that back off so it doesn't get in your way the next time you go to use the Nodes tool later on. Let me grab the Select tool. Okay, that right there is looking pretty good. That's about what I'm looking for. Now what I want to do is put another border around the outside edge of this border, only slightly thinner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to press Control D on the keyboard. And I'm going to fill this with white. And I'm going to give this a white outline by holding Shift and clicking the color white. And for the width, I'll make this larger. I'm going to go with maybe, let's say, 12. See how that looks. And I want to send this to the bottom. Lower selected object to the bottom. That's going to act, this white border is going to act as a buffer between the large black border and the smaller black border. So let me duplicate that again. Control D, and I'll make this one black and give it a black stroke by holding Shift and clicking on black. And I'll send that to the bottom as well. And I'm going to want to make this one a little better, a little bigger. I'm going to try 20. Okay, so that's not quite what I'm looking for. Let me zoom in a little bit. You could zoom in and out by holding Control and rolling up the mouse wheel. I'm going to take this white one right here. I want this border, this gap between the two borders to be bigger. So I'm going to make this one maybe 16, maybe 15. And then I'll take the outer black border over here. And I'll make that, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Let's see, 25 looks a little too big. Let me try 22. A little bigger. I'm just going to manually adjust that until it looks about right. That right there is about what I'm looking for. I think that looks pretty good. So now I can click off of everything. I want to zoom in and take just this outer border right here. I want to go to Path, Stroke to Path, Path, Break Apart, Path, Union. And I'm going to do the same thing to the inner white border right there. Path, Stroke to Path, Path, Break Apart, Path, Union, and then hold Shift and click on the outer black border so that we have both the white and the black borders selected, and go to Path, Difference. Now I'm going to click on the large black border in here, the original one, and I'm going to convert that to a path as well by going to Path, Stroke to Path. And then finally I'm going to hold Shift, I'm going to click on the other border so we have both of these borders selected, and go to Path, Union. Now let me press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. Let me click off of it to deselect everything. It's looking pretty good now. It's going to make a few minor edits and we'll be all finished. So let me click on the text objects in here and let me ungroup them by clicking the button that says Ungroup Selected Objects, or you could press Control-Shift-G like that. And what I will do now is I want to take this border right here. I mean, not this border, this black rectangle right here. I want to duplicate that by pressing Control-D. And I want to make that red, and I want to bring the opacity down in half, roughly in half. What I want to do is create a gap in these borders right here between the ribbon and the borders. So I'm going to use this red rectangle as a reference point for that. So let me grab the Nodes tool again. I'm going to click and drag over this top node. Then I'll hold Shift, click and drag over this node over here. And I'm going to hold Control and click and drag that up to about there. That looks good. And I'll do the same thing down here. Click and drag over this node. Hold Shift, click and drag over that node, and then hold Control and move this one down to about there. So that is sticking out just a little bit further than the black ribbon beneath it. Then I'll grab the Select tool, hold Shift, click on your border right there, and go to Path, Difference. And that right there was the point of that. I wanted to create that gap between the border and the ribbon right there. So the next step is I want to add a little bit of an accent piece right here in the corners of the top and the bottom. So to do that, first what I want to do is enable snapping. I'm going to come up here to where it says enable snapping, turn that on, and we're going to want to make sure we have this one selected that says snap cusp nodes, and this one as well, snap smooth nodes. And I'm going to take this border right here, and I'm going to duplicate that by hitting Control D on the keyboard. And I'm going to make this red, and I'm going to bring the opacity down in half. And I'm just going to click and drag and move this up. I'm going to snap this piece. I'm going to snap the bottom corner into the top corner of the original one right there. And I want to take this red area that's sticking out. I want to use that as the accent piece. So let me grab the Bezier pen, which is over here, where you can press B on the keyboard. And I'm going to start a line going right here in the middle of the black border. Come over here, through here like this. Oops. Here we go. Through here, then back to the starting point. Grab the select tool, hold shift on the keyboard and click on the red object and go to path intersection. And that's what I'm looking for right there. Now I want to duplicate that by hitting Control D. I want to flip that vertically and I want to click and drag this down here. And then snap this onto there like that. Now let me zoom out a little bit. Again, I'm holding Control and rolling down the mouse wheel to zoom. I'm going to hold Shift, click on that red object so we have both red objects selected. And then I'm going to hold Shift and click on the border and go to Path Union. And now I'll go to Path Break Apart so that everything's an individual piece now. And the whole point of that, as you can see here, is to create this little indent. Just a nice little accent piece for the design. So the final step, I would say, would be to add the texture. But first I want to add a little bit of color. So let me click and drag over everything and go to Path, Object to Path. And that's going to take that text and change it from text objects to actual paths that we can work with. Now I want to click off of it to deselect. I want to take just this word vintage right here. I want to ungroup it, unify it together by going to Path, Union, and then hold Shift and click on the banner underneath it and go to Path Difference. And what that did was it pretty much just used the text as a reference to punch negative space, punch a hole through the ribbon there so that I can change the colors and do whatever I want to it. And as you can see, it's kind of like a negative space between there and those words. So now that I've done that, I want to give this thing some color. I'm going to click and drag over all of it. I'm going to give this like a royal blue or like a dark navy blue, something like that. That's pretty good. I want to take this word. Actually, I want to take this piece right here and make this a shade of gold. Obviously, you can color this in however you'd like. You don't have to use the colors I'm using here. I'm going to go to the Fill tab up here under the HSL tab. I want to take the saturation, just bring that down a little bit. Let me bring this up a little bit as well. I want to do the same thing. I want to hold Shift and click on both the word text and this accent piece right here. I want to grab the dropper tool and make that the same color as this. There we go. And I want to take, let me grab the nodes tool. I'm going to click on just the word create here. I'm going to click on that, hold Shift, click on that, each letter individually so that we have them all selected. Go back to the select tool and then grab the dropper and make that the same color right there. And then finally, I want to take the outer border right here and I want to make that the same color as the gold. So let me select those both, grab the dropper over here, or you could press D on the keyboard. That's also another way to grab it. Grab the select tool, press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. And what I'm going to do now is just click and drag over all of this and group this together. Control G to group it together. Let me turn off the snapping for now because that's just going to get in our way. The final step is to add a little bit of a texture on here to make it look worn and aged. And I'll have a link in the description of the video to a page with all of the resources, including this texture. What I'm going to do is once you have the texture open, I'm going to bring my folder over here just so you can see. I have my folder over here. I'm going to take the texture grunge-texture.png and just click and drag it into Inkscape like that. And just leave this little window that pops up, just leave all the defaults there. Go ahead and click OK. And there you have the texture. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can see this. Let me bring the opacity of that down roughly in half so we can see what's on there as well. So what I want to do is place this texture over the image right here. I'm going to hold Control and Shift and scale this down a little bit. Now if you notice where the black areas of the textures are, like this, the black scratch marks, when I apply this texture to this design, all of those black scratches are going to represent negative space in the design. So all of those black scratches are going to become white or negative space within that design. You'll see what I mean when I apply the texture. So I'm telling you that so you could try to figure out where exactly you want the texture to be. Because like if you take this area right here, which is all black, and place it over here, it's going to punch out a big area of the design that's not going to be legible. So I like to make sure I'm not using too much of the texture over the design. Maybe something subtle like that. Now I'll click and drag over both of those, bring the opacity all the way up, and go to Object, Mask, Set. And there you go. I'd say that looks pretty good. So I think that should do it for this tutorial. That's how you can go about creating a vintage style text poster using Inkscape. If you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching.